Go ahead and get started because our first item is Chief Putney is going to present, and it is an action item, so we'll have to take a vote. So, and we have a guest all the way from DC.
Good morning.
So,
good morning.
thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go around real quickly and make introductions, and then we'll have Assistant City Manager Kim Eagle introduce the first agenda item. So let's start back in the corner.
Colleen Tully, City Manager's Office.
LaVonda for Forest and Charlotte Communications and Marketing.
Michelle Hill, Domestic Violence Awareness Board.
Kim Livingston, Mecklenburg County Community Support Services.
Jerry Winkle, Charlotte Fire.
BJ Johnson, Cats.
Phyllis Heath, Strategy and Budget.
Lauren Eggleston, Domestic Violence Advisory Board.
Neil Bloomfield, Domestic Violence Advisory Board.
Angela Maynard, City Manager's Office.
Charles Picari, Committee Member.
Julie Eisel, Committee Chair.
Kim Eagle, City Manager's Office.
Kurt Putney, CMPD.
Reggie Johnson, Charlotte Fire.
We'll go, sorry, Brad, I kind of got out of order. Go ahead with you.
Brad Koch, CMPD.
Brian Cunningham, CMPD.
Paul Pascal, CMPD.
Karen Witcher, City Manager's Office.
Rob Topano, CMPD.
Doug Gallant, CMPD.
Nicholas Swimmer-Jetters, Vice Chair, Citizens Review Board.
Robert Dawkins, State Coalition NC, and I'm on the Police Foundation Stakeholder Committee.
Great. Anybody?
Braxton
Mr.
Winston, Vice Chair.
Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Kim Eagle. We've got a really full agenda, so
We do. Thank you, Madam Chair. You have the agenda in front of you. We have 4 items, and we do have a hard stop at 1 o'clock because of some other commitments. So we've gone through and we've allocated time estimates for each item. So we anticipate spending hopefully around 40 or so minutes on the first item to allow about 25 or so on the second item. Items 3 and 4 are more updates. There's no decision to be made, no action to be taken, so those can be very brief as our time goes. Before I introduce the first item, I wanted to say thank you. This is my first meeting with you guys. Found out about a week ago I was being reassigned, so I'm excited about working with you all. I just wanted to say thank you. So looking forward to it. So the first item we have with us via Skype, Mr. Frank Strab. He is with the Police Foundation, and you all received draft reports from this group a couple of months ago, but now we have the final report. So the goal for today is for you all to hear the overview from the Police Foundation, give you an opportunity to also hear a little bit from the Chief about where we stand with some of the recommendations, in particular an item that was in the manager's recommended budget concerning mental health. So an opportunity for dialogue today, and then hopefully at the conclusion, take a vote to officially receive the report. Staff has been working through, along with CMPD, the contents of the report and the recommendations, and lots of activities been occurring. But today we're asking for you all to vote to officially receive that report. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Ms. Maynard to get us going. Are we live?
Yep, we are
Okay.
good. Can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yep. And I have your presentation up, so just let me know when to click through, okay?
Okay, great. So we'll, first of all, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present this overview of the final report. Please feel free, if you want to interrupt me during the presentation to ask questions, that is fine. I apologize that I'm unable to be there in person, but it's good to meet some of you virtually, to see old friends and colleagues virtually. So the Police Foundation's mandate, so this is the second slide, Angela, was to review the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's response to the September 20th through 22nd, 2016 protests and demonstrations. It's important to note that we had a very specific and focused mandate, and that was on the demonstrations and the police response to it. I know over time there's been a number of questions relative to why didn't you look at this pattern and practice within the police department? Why didn't you examine this issue? We may have tangentially, but our primary focus, as requested by the city, was the police response to the protests and demonstrations. Another piece of our mandate was to engage the community in the process, and I'll speak to how that was accomplished in a minute, to provide recommendations to the police department and the city more generally, and then to provide technical assistance to support the implementation of the recommendations that we made. Next slide, please. So how did we receive community feedback? We gathered community feedback through a number of opportunities. We did individual and group interviews of community members and business leaders. We held informal meetings and conversations. And we had a series of site visits during which we met with neighborhood association leaders, faith leaders. We visited neighborhood barbershops, restaurants, and community centers. We held a community listening session on April 12, 2017. We had community stakeholder group meetings in person on October 2nd, 2017. And then we had subsequent meetings via conference calls on October 26th and November 3rd, 2017. And then finally, we had a community town hall meeting on November 20th, 2017. Next slide, please. The draft report and the final report are developed and presented in a manner similar to the President Obama's 21st Century Task Force report on policing. As I said, we continue the format from the draft report into the final report. The chapters, if you will, focus on the pillars that were identified in President Obama's 21st Century Task Force report. So Pillar 1 looked at policies, protocols, and strategies. Pillar 2, training and de-escalation. Pillar 3, equipment and technology. Pillar 4, social media and communication. Pillar 5, transparency and accountability. And Pillar 6, police community relations. Next slide, please. The foundation, if you will, is that, rightfully so, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department has had and enjoys currently a long history and a national reputation regarding community policing and problem-solving programs. This event took place amid a dynamic national and local environment regarding race relations, community frustrations, and frustrations around policing both locally and nationally. The goal of this engagement was to help the city of Charlotte and Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department restore police legitimacy, increase transparency, accountability, and community engagement. Next slide, please. So under policies, protocols, and strategies, we identified some of the following. First of all, and most importantly, CMPD's response was consistent with their policies and procedures, and we believe, national best practices. CMPD implemented the emergency mobilization plan in a timely and appropriate manner. The Civil Emergency Unit had planned and trained for demonstrations in Uptown. However, one of the unforeseen consequences was the unique challenges that were posed by the protests in the University District. These were outside of the plan that the city police department had prepared, and the geography, the location, the accessibility to train tracks and various other things posed some very unique problems for the police department. Additionally, we made the following recommendations. We believe that the CMPD should continue to promote effective dialogue between the department and the community. They should look for and identify opportunities for community to be involved in the department, with the department, in the development and implementation of policies and procedures. We also recommend that the CEU training be expanded, be revisited to include demonstrations that become highly mobile, that become fractured, where you have different groups mobilizing in different areas of the city that use social media aggressively to communicate both locally and nationally regarding the status of their activities. Next slide, please. The second pillar focuses on training and de-escalation. It's really important to note that CMPD exceeds state mandated training hours and has 171 hours of additional academy training above the state requirement. In 2012, in preparation for the DNC, the department developed specialized training for their mobile field force operations. In many ways, that training informed subsequent both Republican national and Democratic national conventions as recently as the past election cycle, national election cycle. One of the major things that developed out of the demonstrations and the police response to it was the construction conversation team. We believe that that represents a unique model, and we have encouraged departments throughout the country to contact CMPD to learn more about the model and potentially replicate it in their jurisdictions. It is important to note that the construction conversation team came about as a result of dialogue that began during the demonstrations between activists, participants in the demonstrations, and CMPD personnel. Originally, a group of 50 officers were trained, and that training has now been expanded citywide, department-wide, if you will, and community continues to be very, very active in informing that training and conducting that training.
Excuse me just for 1 second. Could you, what is construction conversation team? Constructive? Ah, thank you.
You want to answer that, Chief?
No, I got it. I had the,
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
thank you.
So in terms of recommendations regarding this section, this pillar, one of the things that we think is really important is that the city take on a government-wide approach, and we would argue even beyond government-wide approach, to thinking through and developing and most importantly, practicing their critical incident response protocols. One of the things that we found here in Charlotte, and we found in a number of cities where we've done this assessment, is fractured responses. The police going in one direction, maybe with their public safety partners, government officials going with them, elected officials maybe going in a different way, problems with coordination with other city agencies. So we believe that the city should have and should continue to develop and continue to practice a citywide approach, not just to critical incidents, but to all hazards, both natural disasters and incidents like this. We also think that the department should continue its efforts to expand both recruit training and their in-service training around community dialogue and de-escalation training. We applaud Chief Pudney and the department for recognizing this and for taking a critical look post-incident at this specific issue and working very hard to advance training in these areas. Again, another opportunity to engage community members in the training process. We also think that it's important that all department members have a baseline training, crowd management, and tactics they're used in response to public expressions of their First Amendment rights, and that training is updated on a regular basis, particularly to keep officers cognizant of new developments within the department, as well as best practices. Pillar 3, equipment and technology. CMPD, like many police departments throughout the country, face the challenge of how do they protect their officers, how do they deploy and use less lethal devices, at the same time balancing the rights and the security and the protection of individuals who are expressing their First Amendment rights, as well as the broader community, neighborhoods in which demonstrations are taking place, etc. We believe that CMPD, for the most part, handled this fairly well. They deployed tiers of officers, tiers of equipment, based on what they believe is necessary to respond to and protect all persons involved in the expression of First Amendment rights. One issue, and we're not going to elaborate on this because we don't want to be really what amounts to a dead horse at this point, is there was a lot of tension created around the release of body-worn camera footage. We recognize that there was a transition going on at this point in state law, and that Chief Pudney by himself didn't have the sole discretion as to whether to release the body-worn camera footage or not regarding the incident. Do know that footage was subsequently released to the public. We think that the community should be involved in developing protocols around the release of body-worn camera footage, particularly in critical incidents. We also think that CMPD should endeavor to inform the community whenever possible as to the capabilities and limitations of body-worn camera technology in terms of sound and what you see. It helps inform officers' decisions to engage in certain practices that may not necessarily be captured on body-worn cameras. We believe that the CMPD should continue their deployment strategies in terms of a tiered response to the exercise of First Amendment rights in the form of protests. We also believe that all officers assigned to the civil emergency unit should be equipped with body-worn cameras. Slide number 4. One of the things that we found in Charlotte is that the individuals engaged in exercise of their First Amendment rights, the protesters, the activists, really controlled the narrative in some ways outmaneuvering the CMPD and the city more broadly in terms of their use of social media. We note that the city established the Joint Information Center. CMPD, other city agencies stood up the Emergency Operations Center. But amongst those entities, there was inconsistent communication and messaging. That goes back to some of my earlier comments where we believe that there has to be a plan in place, that plan has to be exercised in practice to ensure that in an emergency situation, during a critical incident, city agencies, elected officials, appointed officials all work together, send a coordinated message to the community that they serve, and that they develop that message in collaboration. So again, this should develop, implement, and exercise a citywide communication plan that integrates all city agencies the council, other elected officials and appointed officials. We also would encourage greater coordination and collaboration around messaging during crisis events, and a greater use of social media generally to engage the community, as well as to disseminate information and correct erroneous stories. Next pillar, pillar 5, please. We believe that the CMPD has aggressively worked to increase transparency. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department is a member of the Police Data Initiative. This was a data initiative created during the Obama administration, wherein police departments throughout the country post data to the PDI website regarding use of force and citizen complaints. The department developed and presented a series of transparency workshops. There are multiple boards, committees, and processes that are in existence to increase CMPD transparency and accountability. And we want to note that both CMPD and the city supported subpoena power for the citizens or the community review board, but currently the state legislation doesn't allow the city to move forward in this direction. Some recommendations we found in this area is that the city should continue to develop and implement strategies that engage and educate the community on its practices, as well as transparency around data, around use of force, citizen complaints, traffic stops, etc. We also recommend that CMPD return to the conduct of annual department and community surveys. I would like to note that currently CMPD is in conversation with us. We administer through the Police Foundation with funding from the National Institute of Justice, what's called the National Law Enforcement Applied Research and Data Policing Platform. That platform provides free of charge a series of department surveys as well as community surveys, and we are working with the CMPD to have them join the platform community. And again, continue to urge and support CMPD's efforts to ensure that accurate data is easily accessible to the community, and we believe that CMPD is working well in that regard. Pillar 6, is community relations. As I stated at the very beginning of the presentation, CMPD has a strong and long history of good community relations. They are recognized throughout policing as a leader in the field, but to a degree, in this particular case, I think they were caught off guard, like many police departments, by the amount of tension that existed nationally regarding policing, and certainly in the local Charlotte community. There was somewhat, and I think this is understandable in the city size of Charlotte, a disconnect between some community leaders and the police department. New leaders were emerging. Some of the traditional leaders were absent from part of the conversation. But again, I applaud Chief Pudney and the police department, their command staff, working very aggressively since this incident to not only establish new contacts, but to maintain those contacts. Community members, we found, were hungry for opportunities to interact with officers, with the command staff, and to build relationships. And again, as I said, I really applaud Chief Pudney and the department for the efforts that they're making to build bridges that are long-lasting between the department and the community. So our recommendations is that CMPD should continue in that regard. They should continue to engage community members in ways that provide meaningful input to the department and provide information to the community regarding the department's operations, policies, and procedures. And finally, we again emphasize that the information that is shared through these contacts is accurate and easily accessible to the community. And so in essence, that's an overview of the final report that we presented to the city.
Thank you, Dr. Straub. We'll take questions. I want to just start with one going back to the pillar on number 5 on transparency and accountability. You mentioned in the overview that the CMPD and the city supported subpoena power, but the legislators won't allow that right now. Is that something the foundation agrees with or supports or has no opinion on?
No, we support expanding the ability of the CRB to conduct its work. Clearly, the city and the police department have supported that, and we would join with them in their support of granting subpoena power to the CRB.
Okay. And in the event that we would want to pursue this again, would you have data that shows what other cities have done with subpoena power and how they feel it is or isn't effective in the form of transparency and engaging a citizens review board?
Yes, ma'am. We have a project now with NACOL, which is a national organization of civilian oversight organizations, where we are reviewing practices across the country regarding civilian oversight, and we would be able to and be happy to share that information with the council and with the city.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions?
If I might, Madam Chair, you have another document in front of you that you might want to access as you think about questions. This is a summary table that provides the foundation's recommendation, and then in the right-hand column, you see an update in terms of response and actions from CMPD. So it's a thick document, so I know you don't want to go through it right now, but just in terms of a point of reference for any items that you have a question about. Thank you.
So, if nobody can.
Mr. Mitchell.
So, Madam Chair, thank you. Kim, so just for example, 1.1, is that a reference to Pillar 1, promote effective dialogue department? So that's how they correspond?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's correct.
And I guess, how can I say this nice? So I guess what's missing is an implementation schedule. So it's one thing to list a course of action, and I think it would be helpful if we have, here's one we'd like to implement. So is that big guy, or is that the community safety? Who has that responsibility?
Well, you'd have to tell me specifically. You're talking about promote effective dialogue. That's been going on.
Got it.
Yeah, it's ongoing.
Okay.
I think what we're trying to do is find new ways to do it as well.
Okay.
But yes, it's already ongoing.
Okay.
So
it would depend on your specific point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then to the chief point, then it's up to the committee to identify those we want to implement or make a priority.
And we can help you parse that out, Mr. Mitchell. Some of the items have been underway for a while. Some of them are in progress. They're at various stages. We can have more conversation around helping you do that.
Okay, as a follow-up manager, I think that'll be helpful for all of us, because we don't want to take this document and then start saying, you know, should we do 1.3, 1.5? If you can give us an update, those that are completed,
Sure.
those in progress, so we know what's left.
Absolutely.
Total of 9 of 34.
9 of 34?
Total of 9 of 34, we really need to talk through the implementation, so
Okay.
we'll highlight those for you as well.
Thank you, Chief.
Exactly to your point, Councilmember Mitchell, that's what we felt like we needed to do, is at least have Chief come in, have Dr. Straub come in and tell us what the report
Okay.
said, where they are, and then it's up to us, I think, to make sure it's
Keep it
on
moving.
track.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. 9 of 34.
Mr. Winston?
Dr. Eagle, can you
clarify kind of what our action is going to be today. What does this mean, receiving this report?
Right. So we felt it important that the committee officially received the report. We intentionally did not use the word adopt because there are, to Mr. Mitchell's point, recommendations contained in the report that we've already begun or that we're approaching from a different angle than is written in the actual documentation of the report. Receiving it allows you all to help us, in conjunction with the chief, guide the implementation, and it allows maximum flexibility. So you're taking it officially in hand, and then you can take that to the full council, recognizing that implementation is already underway, to the chief's point.
So there's more here in this report than just recommendations. There's also an incident report about what happened out there. So when we have this, when we ask for this report to be done, what was the purpose? Is this to provide an official account of what we experienced?
I'll ask the chief to respond to that.
Mainly, as Chief Strop said, it was really about the response to the protests in particular over the 3 days. So, and he can speak more specific, but that was all that was requested through the report. That's all that they really focused on, was our response to that incident.
So in receiving this report, would this be, this is the city's account of what happened?
I think this is the Police Foundation's account, based on the...
We're recognizing that we accept the report as ours.
Yeah.
Dr. Straub, I have a question for you. In terms of the incident and the CMPD response description, how did you go about compiling the narrative that you have on these pages, starting on page 10?
So there were a number of processes that we used. We did interviews of various members of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. We interviewed a number of the community members who participated in the demonstrations over the course of the days that were involved. Those included citizens, they included individuals who led the demonstration, included faith leaders, and included individuals who observed the demonstrations. We also reviewed court documents and official testimony that was provided by persons in the CMPD to the court. We reviewed body-worn camera footage, street camera footage. That would, I think, give you some idea of how we built the chronology. And we relied on CMPD's court testimony, really, and the chronology that they presented to give us the timelines, and then tried to augment that with verifiable information from individuals involved in the demonstrations.
Yeah, so to my colleagues, I apologize. I did read this, and I have some notes, and I have a lot of questions and concerns, specifically surrounding the incident report. I was part of the groups that interviewed with Police Foundation. I was out there. The lawsuit that I filed against CMPD in the city is noted on several parts of it, but at least part of that lawsuit, particularly Major Campagna's affidavit and statement that was given to it. And as I read through the incident report, there are I won't call them falsities, but there are a lot of questions. There are a lot of things that are left out. There are a lot of things that are glossed over, very important parts. But there are some inaccuracies in here. I think this really should be called this should be CMPD's account of the response, because I don't see a lot of my voice in here. I don't see a lot of the voices that were in the room with me when I was talking to the Police Foundation. I don't see a lot of the demonstrators' accounts and evidence that there's a plethora of information out there. I don't see that represented in here. All I see is Major Campagna's affidavit cited from this case, but there were several other accounts of it. Did you just give Major Campagna's account of the incident credence and ignore all the other accounts of the demonstrations from that lawsuit?
No, sir. As I said, we interviewed a myriad of people. We used Major Campagna's document as the official record of the event because it was sworn testimony where possible. And again, where it was verifiable, we included interview information and other information that we received. But again, I use the word verifiable because we believed that it was important to put only information in there that was taken under sworn testimony or that we could verify by looking at body-worn camera footage. We could look at text messages or social media messages, and we asked all of the people that we interviewed that if they had documentation or other sources to verify their statements or their experiences, that they provide that to us. We fully recognize that it is not a full accounting of the event from all individuals' perspectives, that there will always be information that can be added. Our goal was to set a chronology that gave context to and provided an opportunity from which to develop findings and recommendations. Again, this report, both the draft and the final, were vetted by members of the stakeholders group. So there was community involvement and community review of the document before it was accepted by and forwarded to the city and the police department.
So I would question your ability to verify some things because, like I said, as I read through this, there are things that honestly are just false, and I don't understand how you can only say that statements in Major Campagna's affidavit were verifiable when you just said that folks had tons of social media, were controlling the narrative. There were pictures and videos and cell phone records that you can verify accounts of people that were not CMPD. For instance, on page 17 at the account of the outside of the Omni Hotel at 8:25 p.m. a CEU platoon and personal protective equipment led by a captain arrived in the area. Seeing the crowd dispersing from the epicenter, the captain staged a platoon in the elevator lobby of the Omni Hotel as to not provoke the crowd. However, the crowd followed the officers and the CEU platoon moved out of the lobby and established a line outside of the garage area. The crowd engaged the officers, throwing water bottles and other objects at the officers, including a fuse-lit explosive device. That's false. I was standing with Major Campagna live streaming that event. That did not happen at all. I don't know how you verified that. I would love to see and know how you verified that. According to that note that was from the affidavit of Major Campagna, as well as a story from a Charlotte Observer article. I'm not sure how a secondary source verifies an official account. I think I even provided you the video of that incident that night, this specific event. Were you not able to verify the facts of what happened from that video or anything like that? I was literally in a conversation with Major Campagna when this happened.
Counselor, we have a sworn statement that was sworn to under oath. We use that as the basis of our depiction, if you will, or accounting of that incident. I would hope that Major Campagna told a truthful accounting of that. We did review your video. We did review other videos that were available, but we stand by the official account that
They came out, there's no mention that in that CMPD came out shooting pepper ball rounds outside the Omni Hotel into the crowd. That's just not mentioned at all. That's how the incident started and got violent. Why is there no mention of that in this account here?
No, I apologize, sir, that you have a difference or take umbrage with our account.
Well, I have, like I said to my colleagues, I apologize. Everything that's going on this week, I was unable to get you these notes. I would like to still get you these notes, but there are several inconsistencies to this report. And if we are going to receive this, whatever it may be, I would like to put some type of protest under this because it's just not accurate. And if we're going to have this as one of our documents, it has to be the truth. And it has to be, especially if we paid $400,000 of our city taxpayers' money. This should hold up to at least the truthful narrative of what we experience as a city, and it doesn't.
So, yeah, so I would say, Kim, we can talk about this a little bit more, but maybe the best way to handle it is if, I don't know, but perhaps noted in the report that it was disputed by other individuals that were.
I think it can be verified. That's the thing. These are things not disputed. These are things that can be verified.
Well, then we need to have that conversation because I don't think that we can accept it as a council if council members on the committee feel that it's not accurate. Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, you know, I would just be very interested in, and I'll take you up on that offer, Braxton, to go through some of these detailed notes because, again, for me, it's not about, you know, it's about getting the correct narrative of what actually happened. And if you have logical disputes that can be proven, we paid almost $500,000 for this. I want to know what they are. It doesn't mean someone might be right or wrong. Things happen, but we're trying to understand that. And if we paid almost $500,000 for something that can be disputed, I want to know that. But the broader point, so I would recommend we wait until we can have that conversation and then come back, because this needs to be a tool that helps us move forward, right?
So I agree. So what I would recommend is that we try to get, you know, we did not have our April meeting. It got canceled for other reasons. I think we've got a lot on our agenda. I would recommend we set up another committee meeting where we can really talk about this. And it might be that the Police Foundation report is amended, that we ask for it to be amended to recognize that there just isn't an agreement on actually those who were interviewed and what both parties, both sides or all sides said actually took place. So because the goal of this is not, I don't think at this point, the goal is not to say, point fingers, who's right, who's wrong. It's how to move forward.
Agreed.
And if the public doesn't agree with this,
that's right,
we're really not getting anything out of this. So
a lot of credibility.
you know, people can feel this was the bona fide truth, but if the public and those who were there don't feel good about that, then we're not making the most out of what we invested in. So our goal is to move forward and to have the kind of relationship with our police department that we know we can have, to acknowledge the hard work they've done since this report. And to me, that's really, you know, we might never get to the bottom of that. No, you know, I don't mean to skim over it at all. But we want to hear that, and we want to come out, we want to work on the outcomes.
Can I, if I
I'm
can
sorry,
no problem, if I can just
yeah.
finish. I agree. And again, just a clarification point. At the end of the day, I don't think it matters if the public is for it or against it. It matters that it's the truth. That's all that matters. And if that narrative can be proven that some of it is not accurate, then we can't trust parts of it. And trust is all that matters. So the final thing I'd say is, when I boil this down into layman's terms and areas that I see in there and then also areas that I don't, I kind of put everything into 4 buckets. There's the department training, tools, technology, protocols. A lot of that looks great. I know a lot of hard work has gone in, and I think there's a lot of good stuff there. The second is crisis communication. We talk a little bit about it. We've started in crisis management tabletop stuff, but there are huge parts that caused a lot of this and made it further kind of impactful by how the elected leaders did and didn't react at the time. That needs to be a huge part of this, because the exercise we did the other day is just the starting point of that. How we communicate, how we listen, all of that's really important. I'd like to see more emphasis there on what our game plan is when this gets to that next phase. Three, I know there's been some work, but we can't talk a lot about it, but the outside forces of disruption. When we talk about those who aren't truly involved in elements of, Russian involvement in social media, while we can't relay all those controls, we as a council better be damn sure that we're good at preventing that next time. So I think that's a huge part. And then the final part, and I think this is the most important part, is in 1.1 in this foundation recommendation, it talks about strategies and having opportunities that promote effective dialogue between the department and the community around race and policing. This is the macro element that underlies the whole thing that is so important. And I would make 2 points on this. One, it's not just the department and the community. It's the community having a dialogue within itself, too. Mm-hmm. And this is where the Community Relations Committee, Willie Ratchford, and all the great work they do is so important to getting this right. You've heard me talk about this before, but if we don't have our responsibilities as council members, if we don't appoint the right group of people to have those hard conversations amongst themselves, and it's just one side or another and the majority kind of singing from the same hymnal and then talking to the department in part of that equation, we are doing a disservice to that major element the next time this comes up. That has to be, and we have the responsibility of making sure the right people are on that committee and making sure they're having the tough conversations with themselves and then with the chief and the department, because that right there is the one thing that is never going to be solved in a day or an afternoon, and we got to get working on it, because I'm not convinced that we've set them up for success yet.
Okay, we'll take, I don't know if Mr. Mitchell has a comment, and we just have to watch our time a little bit. But.
Madam Chair, I think all the comments are, you all may have been excellent. I just think it is time sensitive. We've had this report since November. The community is kind of waiting, how do we move on collectively? Our fiscal year ends June 30th, and so I agree with you. I think people are ready for us to take action. Mm-hmm. And so I'm all supportive of a June meeting, and this is our only topic. Give us time to get Councilmember Winston. I really like to get your feedback, your comment, so we all have a chance to look at those, because I know you was very involved. And so I'm just a fan of, let's take action, let's move quickly before the fiscal year ends.
Okay, and we have one for June. The question is, do we want to add another one?
I think it's important we do it.
I would agree that we could add another. I just want to clarify. This is not. I'm speaking. This is not about. My view is not in here. My video is not in here. We have a chance. We had a chance. We will have a chance to accurately describe and understand as a whole what we experienced. I would have liked for the report, whoever did this, to be a step in taking us there. We have verifiable evidence. This is probably the most videotaped, recorded, written about event ever in the history of Charlotte. We could have every minute by minute, angle by angle, talked about, because even out there, when there were 1,000, 2,000 people, if you were on one part of the block, you had a different experience than if you were in the back of the crowd, right? So this is not what we have here. We have a very narrow view, a narrow view. Look at the footnotes, a very narrow explanation about what we experienced, and that's not fair. It's not fair to us as a government to make the changes that we need. We have to start from a shared sense of accurate, verifiable information. And that's not what we have here. And we should get that so that we can move forward. Secondly, I would say one of this is what gets frustrating to me personally. Yes, we can have, I think constructive communication should be a prerequisite of being a police officer. I don't think it should be a special unit. I think folks that interact every day with our public should have those skills. So those are not the kinds of of changes in policy I'm looking for, and I feel like a lot of our citizens were looking for. Look, I'll go out and say it. I don't think Keith Lamont Scott should be dead. I don't think Eric Garner should be dead. I don't think there are a lot of what people are protesting and people are asking for are big changes in policy that don't allow this to escalate in 30 to 60 seconds to go from a guy sitting in a car to getting killed. These are the types of changes that I want to see. How are we going to reinvent how we police, reinvent how we interact with dangerous situations? These are the types of policies and recommendations of changes that I want to see, especially if I'm paying $500,000, $400,000 for in-depth report on things like that. And I think that's what the community is asking for. Because until we get that, it's always going to have follow best practices. It's always going to be in line with policy. And the people are just going to continue to get frustrated, and we're never going to get anywhere. We're going to keep having this.
Mr. Mitchell?
Madam Chair, let me just follow up on one thing, and Councilman Bakari said it. So, Dr. Straub?
Yes, sir.
And I think it would be good for us, especially someone who lived through this as an elected official. One thing the community would like to see is almost a bullet point on how does elected officials should react during a crisis. What is our role? Because I think during this experience, we sent the wrong message and not working very closely with our CMPD. So we sent the wrong message, not being visible and like we were there for our community. And so as my colleague mentioned, of all your bullet points, there's not a pillar on elected officials, our role, our responsibilities, what we could do better. When you go to other cities, have you looked at the elected official role and how they play in the handling crisis in communities?
Yes, sir, and I think if you read the report itself versus just my overview, there are specific questions or specific issues addressed around the involvement of elected officials. I will also say that we've had a number of conversations with the city regarding technical assistance to come in and work with the council, both elected and appointed officials, around this specific issue, around developing a collaborative, comprehensive communication plan and strategy, identifying goals, identifying how various roles get integrated during a crisis. So those conversations are ongoing, and we believe that at a future date we will return to Charlotte to work with all of you to address those specific issues that you just raised.
Okay. I want to give Chief Putney the opportunity to speak, and
Chief,
then
greatly appreciate it. Thank you. So, a couple points, and council members, don't think I didn't hear everything you said. Heard it yourself, and I don't disagree. Truth is, and facts are critically important. You're still going to have different perspectives, and that's fine. But what I'd like to say, too, is an action, and this is in there, it's a lot of recommendations on us, and that's a third of the equation. That's right. A third of the equation. We're talking about policies. We got policies now. Policies are not going to get you there. Right. One action item, one recommendation I have for you is support what we're trying to do when we recruit, and we get pushback because we're not taking people who can't communicate effectively. We're getting sued for the very things that you're talking about. We'd like to see some support from you there. I'd like to see some support from you there when people within the organization grieve and sue because they're not getting promoted, because we want the ability to say, you're not the right fit, because there's some personality issues as well. I'd like your support on that. I'm not done, but I'm going to wrap up soon.
Take your time.
So lastly is behavioral of all involved. I don't disagree. The last thing I want to see is somebody else die because of our action. That's right. But what I'll tell you is, it's really our reaction. What I also want you to support me in is some accountability on us as citizens to do our role too. Right. Because if you cooperate and we escalate, that's against not only our policy, which we're talking about here, which isn't worth I don't care how much money you want to pay for it. But we're talking about also the law, the legal standard that we're never going to get around. We need to talk about some accountability on us as community members to give the officer the opportunity to de-escalate. Some of that is a part of this whole thing too that I'd like to put in the policy. I'd swear to it, I'd chisel it in stone if you want it tomorrow, because the broader conversation is just what you're talking about. You can put all the accountability on us you want, but if the community still is struggling because of the environment and everything else, and they're making bad decisions because they're scared for their life, because they're encountering people who are trying to help them, we're going to be right here talking. Your next chief is going to be talking, and nobody's doing. The reason only 9 out of 34 aren't done or underway is because I'm going to need your help and direction. I say it should be 12, because I shouldn't be the only one committing or getting recommended to. I got some recommendations too. So thank you for your opportunity to respond.
Here, here. That's well said.
I think we've got to have another way to go about this. And I don't know if it's another meeting, but we just got to have another way to go about this. We can't, clearly we're not going to accept this report because a lot of this stuff comes to council after there's been all this input, and then we're asked to accept it or reject it. Yes. And we don't know. You know, we're kind of going, okay, well, let's put the 50 other issues to the side and go through this. So we need a little bit of time to think about what Chief has said, think about what Braxton has said, and do it properly. So
I have a recommendation, Madam Chair.
Mr. Bakari?
My recommendation is, I think you nailed it spot on. This is not a topic by which we can pay someone to hand us the answer and adopt.
Right.
That is one of many inputs. The mayor, in what she has done to change how we approach committees, has offered up, and we have not taken it up yet, this idea of creating an ad hoc committee for a period of time for a topic important enough that warrants some actual work and a subgroup of people to get together and take multiple inputs and then create our view.
Well,
so
that's
I might
another
make the
topic, because I would
recommendation-
disagree with that. We tried to create an ad hoc Monday night. So let's put that aside for a minute, because
okay, regardless of if it's ad hoc or whatever, I think a group of people need to focus in and do some actual work where there's a one-third view of all the parties and what those recommendations truly need to be, because there's as much on us as a council and how we communicate and what we do and how we support and how we hold accountable as there is on the chief and the department, which we've seen all of that, as there is on Willie and that group to have these macro conversations and bring the community. So this can't be something that we come back once or even twice a month and have things presented to us. It's just, it'll never get solved, and I will never be supportive of adopting, at this point, somebody else's answer to me.
Let's not make an assumption here that none of this has been done. The whole jump microgrant thing came out of the fact that Chief said, we need you to be accountable. We need you, the community, to step up and help us do our work. And we said, okay, we hear that, so we're trying to get a program going to work with the community to acknowledge the work that they're doing. So this is not...
I don't mean to imply that a lot of hard work hasn't been done. A great point, Madam Chair. I did not mean to imply that.
Chief, did you have a follow-up you wanted to add?
Well, I think what we need to do is, whenever it's adopted or not, I just think we need to look at this as a living, breathing
absolutely, yeah,
document that drives us moving forward.
Yeah.
What I really wanted to talk about was Community Policing and Crisis Response Team that we proposed to in the budget, because to me, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how we can prevent while we go back and revisit and see exactly what all truly happened and how we move forward. I don't think it's either or.
Yeah.
And so your work group, ad hoc committee, I don't think any of that's necessary. I think people need to come together and start doing it.
Yeah.
Bring in partners who seem to never agree with anybody. Well, me anyway. But bring them in so we all are part of it. But stake ourselves out about the work. That's all I ask.
So thank you for that. I think sometimes you just have to all lay it out on the table and get it out. I do think it's a work in process. I think we've got to keep talking about it, and we'll find a way to do it. I would ask, Dr. Eagle, I would ask if we could find another time
Absolutely.
to talk.
Yep. We'll go back and have some conversations internally,
Yeah.
not only about schedule and adding a meeting.
Right.
Because I'm hearing you say that, but also about process and path forward and what might make sense based on the feedback for today.
But I just request actionable, execution. I mean, like, no more meetings, no, like, somebody needs to get into a room with a group of people and get to work.
I will say, sorry to have commandeered the time.
Mr. Mitchell
Sorry.
first. Mr. Mitchell?
Oh, okay.
But there is some good stuff in this budget around crisis intervention. And I wish we had more time to talk about what the manager and chief have been working on.
So, Madam Chair, that's how I was going to follow, both Chief and Vice Chair. The schedule right now is to approve the budget on June 11th, and I think the Chief's made it very clear he would like to talk about that. So I'll be willing to look at the first week in June. I think it would be helpful for us to hear the Chief as we go to vote on June 11th. So, Madam Chair and the committee, we got June 4th to June 8th. I'll make myself available for that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. That's a good idea.
We'll work on making that happen.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
All right?
Thank you
Ready for
very
the
much.
next item?
We are.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Strong.
Why does this committee never have light topics? It's like-
So the next item on your agenda is a report from the Domestic Violence Advisory Board.
Okay.
So Karen Wichard from the City Manager's Office will help introduce the topic. She's been working very closely on this effort, and then we have invited the Chair and Vice Chair to deliver the report.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim. I have the pleasure of introducing today the Chair and Vice Chair of the Domestic Violence Advisory Board, which is a joint city-county board that was created in 1992. And really their main charge is to review our systems and identify gaps and raise awareness. And so they're here today to deliver their annual report.
May we specially recognize?
I'm getting there.
Okay, good. There's a special recognition that we need to do.
Their annual report, they've given it to the county commission, so I'm very much looking forward to hearing what they have to share. So we have Neil Bloomfield, the chair, and then Lauren Eggleston, who I think many of you already know, their vice chair. And I also want to recognize Kim Livingston, who is the county support for this board. The county, while this is a joint board, county staff really support a lot of their work. And so with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you. I'd also like to recognize Patricia Wiley and Deshelle Hill, two other members of our board. If you all could just raise your hand so that you could be acknowledged. We certainly appreciate you attending. So we're here today, this afternoon in particular, to report on the epidemic of domestic violence in our community. It is our charge to address the gaps, but also advocate for the victims in our community. And by the time that we are done presenting, if it's anything like the presentation before the Board of County Commissioners, 300 women, men, and children will have been the victims of domestic violence. Some of those victims for the first time, some for a time beyond count. And this is an issue of life and death for these individuals. In North Carolina alone, 79 individuals were killed as a result of domestic violence. 15 people in Mecklenburg County were killed as a result of domestic violence. I'm just going to skip some of the background stuff given the time that has preceded us and where we are in your all's schedule, because what I want to do is I want to focus on our recommendations. Councilmember Bakari mentioned that you were looking for action items, and that's how we have tried to structure our report. We have identified issues. We have tried to identify the support for why those are issues in our communities, along with recommendations and the organizations that we think can help carry out those recommendations so that you can take those action items and act on them, knowing that there is support in the community to take those things forward. So based on the work that we have done over the past 2 years, because we did not report last year, we have the following recommendations. The first is a rental subsidy targeted specifically towards the survivors of domestic violence and their families. The second is funding for a domestic violence advocate for alternative housing locations. The third is funding assistance to aid in the ongoing e-filing initiative. Fourth is funding a second outreach and prevention provision. And the fifth is monitoring the implementation of an upcoming strangulation training. And I'll just go into each of those in a little bit more detail. Feel free to ask about any as we go forward or at the end. So the first one is a rental subsidy. One of the major milestones in our community, specifically as it relates to domestic violence, was the founding of the Clyde and Ethel Dixon Domestic Violence Shelter in 2012. It's a 40,000 square foot facility with 80 beds, and it is a lifeline to many that have been the victims of domestic violence. According to a recent study, 80% of the mothers with children experiencing homelessness are also victims of domestic violence. And of that group, 57% reported that the immediate cause of the homelessness was domestic violence. And so as you can see, that's why a shelter like that is a lifeline to folks that are in dramatic need. And our shelter in our community has helped address this problem, but it has significant capacity limitations. So 2 years ago, the shelter was at capacity on 362 out of 365 days. Last year, it was at capacity on 293 days out of 365. And this capacity issue has real-world negative consequences, obviously. So last year, the DV shelter had to refer 336 individuals to alternative locations. Many of those locations do not have the types of services that domestic violence victims need to help get their life at least partially back on track. Based on our discussions with the service providers, and the way that we came to these recommendations is we reached out to both individuals in the communities as well as the service providers in the community to get a better understanding of what folks were experiencing, but also what the initiatives were underway and what services were available and how we may be able to enhance those services in our community to make them better. And so based on our discussions, particularly with our discussions of the service providers that are responsible for maintaining the shelter, it is not an issue of a lack of shelter housing. And the reason for that is when you're a victim of domestic violence, there is a point in time where you need shelter options, you need protection. But people are staying at the shelter well beyond that time because there is a lack of affordable housing long term. And so if you are a survivor of domestic violence sitting at a shelter without alternative means, you are faced with an impossible position of taking yourself and oftentimes your children and becoming homeless or returning back to your abuser. And that is why we have such significant capacity issues. The community has recently received a grant for $350,000 from the Office of Violence Against Women that is designed to help transitional housing, long-term housing, to help these victims get back on their feet and start reintegrating into our community. But that is only helping 20 survivors. And as I mentioned, we're looking at a number of 300 plus that have been turned away from the domestic violence shelter. And so what we would ask in terms of a rental subsidy is $600,000 to fund the housing for 50 survivors based on the expenses that these organizations have experienced for housing, and an additional $100,000 to provide funding to implement this program. It's not going to cover all of the housing needs that we have, but we think it's a significant start in that right direction. We further recommend that this additional housing program be implemented by Safe Alliance. They are the organization that's responsible for running the domestic violence shelter. They're also implementing the grant funding that I mentioned, and we think that they are in the position to most efficiently take this funding and put it to good use in our community.
Excuse me, Mr. Mitchell.
I think we're going to ask the same question. Go ahead, Madam Chair.
I was going to say it's 600 for
Right.
rental subsidy and 100 for what?
So the rental subsidy would be used for rent, utilities, other things of that nature.
Yeah, no,
The
but-
$100,000 would be used for staffing to help individuals find the housing, to find the additional services that would make that $600,000 a grant that would really be effective for these individuals. So if you just provide the housing amount, there's not enough resources to then facilitate these people into the housing units.
May I, Madam Chair, so a follow-up, is that 300,000 from both the city and the county, or 600,000 from each body?
So I don't know that we have a recommended sort of breakdown.
Okay.
I mean, we would certainly defer to you all, but it would be a total recommendation, yes.
And that is for, is that
Yeah, please.
this fiscal year
Yes.
So I guess, did they make a official request to us?
No.
Okay, so this is the first time we hear, yeah. And we all cringing because we had our adjustment of budget
Yesterday.
yesterday.
Yeah.
Yesterday, so,
Yeah, the report just came in a couple of weeks ago,
okay,
relative to timing, so.
okay, wow.
There's still time.
Yeah, that's right, we don't vote till next week, okay.
Wait, so we missed the adds and deletes?
Yes.
That
It
was
It was
yesterday.
yesterday.
If only somebody could have told you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah, you would think somebody. You would think.
I know he's watching.
Yeah. So
I
on
think
a,
somebody's got some explaining to do at home tonight.
so on a serious note, but
Yeah,
Madam Chair, that's a
seriously, yeah.
good point. And I don't know, do we want to take official vote to recommend to council that we bring this back for consideration?
You could do that,
Okay.
and you can always add and delete, because straw
well,
votes haven't occurred yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I do too.
I
Just
have,
go ahead.
before we do that,
Right.
this might be something that honestly gets recommended to the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, because
That's exactly where I was going.
as it was said, that this was a total, and this is something that we want to get
Monday.
buy-in from other parts. We want to know how heavy our lift is before we go and ask.
Well, before we do that, though, we should probably let you finish your
Okay.
presentation.
On the number though, just let me make, and I'm sure as we go on, there might be other things, but this angle of that piece feels like something that is directly in the wheelhouse of the county. I mean, like, I think we have to, and this is part of the intergovernmental relations role, get better partnering to make sure, because what I would like to do is find policy or investment or something on the preventative side of this of, how are these numbers what you guys have told us? How is that, how are we not burying these people underneath the jail that are committing these crimes, which is something maybe more directly in
A lot
our
of them are
wheelhouse?
misdemeanors, but
Yeah, I mean,
let's go back to the presentation, because there's a lot more.
Can I just, one thing I would say is rental subsidy, so that'd be something that can be straight out of the Housing Trust Fund. That's right.
Well, let's
True.
Yeah, let's go through that, because there's even another little piece to this, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. And one thing that I'm sure you all will look for, but I want to make sure it doesn't happen, is I don't want these recommendations to be viewed as well, I think the other group is going to handle it, the Board of County Commissioners is going to handle it, the City Council is going to handle it, because I think some of the feedback that we have received, this is a housing issue, this is a city issue,
Yeah.
and so it's not for the Board of County Commissioners to deal with. And so, and it sounds like you have a working group to coordinate. I just want to make sure that the recommendations
We meet
don't get
Monday,
lost in
so
between.
we can move quickly, and we can
Right,
talk to them
sure.
beforehand, so.
And this
Let's
is the
go
exact same thing we presented to them.
Yes.
as well.
So, I will just say that we've had this conversation as a city and a county, and we were looking, and I want you to finish your presentation, but we were looking at it holistically, and then all of a sudden the decisions got made, and I felt it should have come through community safety.
Wow.
Yeah, but the decision got made on the magistrate's court. You remember the
Oh.
emails we got from Mr. Puckett?
Mr.
And,
Puckett.
and it just bypassed us, yet I was on the original letter. So we got a little work to do on our end,
Okay.
but I would like for you to finish your presentation before
That's fine, I appreciate
go
that.
down that road.
So the next recommendation is actually related to the first. It's not a specific request related to housing, but it relates to the issue of we have this domestic violence shelter. It is over capacity. And what happens is that these individuals that are turned away have to go somewhere else. Oftentimes that is a homeless shelter, oftentimes it's a Salvation Homeless Shelter or elsewhere. And what happens is if you are outside of the domestic violence shelter, you are not then connected oftentimes to the resources that our community has invested so much in to help these individuals. And so one recommendation that we think would help that would be to fund a position for an individual to go to these other locations, to these other homeless shelters and other facilities, to meet with individuals that are victims of domestic violence and connect them to the resources that our community has invested so much in to provide. Because I think what is difficult, not only for victims of domestic violence, but for a general individual in this community to understand, is all the resources that we have invested in so much to help these individuals. and how you can get access to them. And unless you have an advocate there to help you, you're not going to get those services in all likelihood. And so in talking with individuals in the community, including the domestic violence service providers, we think starting this recommendation with one individual at a cost of $60,000 annually, we think is 60,000, yes.
60, okay.
Is a recommendation that we would make. And again, we think that because Safe Alliance is the organization responsible for running the shelter, and this is a recommendation that is in coordination with the services they provide, that they are the organization best situated to have this position as part of their organization. The next recommendation that we have is slightly different, and it takes on an ongoing initiative in our community, which is an e-filing initiative. And it's called the e-filing initiative, but it really goes a lot farther than that. And so it addresses, if we look at our current challenges, protective orders is sort of the first line of defense if you're a victim of domestic violence. It is a way for you to get separation from the abuser and to start putting your life back together. And over the past 8 years, our community has done a really good job of helping victims of domestic violence receive protective orders. And we've seen an increase in protective orders being issued of 65%, which is wonderful. The downside that we have seen is that the number of protective orders that have been obtained but not served, so the victim has taken the initiative and the courage to go down to court to get a protective order, possibly face their abuser, and get this protective order. They have done all that, but then this protective order doesn't get served on the abuser, and so it has essentially no effect. That has gone up 450% during that same period. And so this e-filing initiative, we think, will help that because it will allow these victims of domestic violence, one, to not have to go to court. They will be able to go to a domestic violence service provider facility and appear remotely in court to get the initial protective order. It will also allow the documentation for these protective orders to be electronic so that it is clear that there are not mistakes and that this information can be made available to the officers in the field, which would make it easier for them to serve these protective orders on individuals, because the alternative, if it's not available in the electronic system, is they have to go back to the station to get the documentation, and at that point, the chances of that individual still being there are slim to none. And so,
and I think another part of that is, I know that other communities in North Carolina have done this, have really focused on also kind of the increase in law enforcement officer safety, because they have the information. It's not scribbled handwriting that they're just having to pull up in the moment and see, and so it's really going to increase safety for our officers as well to be able to have that information electronically in real time.
And so, again,
Excuse me, just
please go ahead.
I was just going to ask for clarification. This request is a combination of staff and technology.
That's right.
Yes. Okay.
And so, again, as part of what we are trying to accomplish, beyond just identifying the problem, we have spoken to the domestic service providers. We have also spoken with the Mecklenburg County Clerk, that is the entity charged with implementing this e-filing system. And in discussions with the Clerk of Court, we are making a recommendation which they support for $240,000 in additional funding so that they can have additional staff in the Clerk of Court's office to allow this e-filing process to happen. Because otherwise, like, the staffing levels right now are not set up to allow the e-filing process to happen. The data has to be entered into a database, and that just takes man time to do that. And there is expected to be an increase in protective orders sought because of this process. And so in order to staff up for that, they need additional funding.
So what was that number again?
240,000.
240.
And
okay.
I think that's also expected to be a short-term expense because I think maybe I think we talked about like 18 months, 2 years, something like that, because in the meantime, we're going to be working, the community's going to be working together to route these, this process to Safe Alliance, and so this will be a short-term kind of holdover while the staffing, short-term expense.
Okay.
Yeah, we've learned a lot from other counties implementing the software and the e-filing, and because of our volume in Mecklenburg County in particular, we want to use those lessons learned in the smaller counties and do it right, and avoid some of the pitfalls they've experienced. So the technology upgrade's really important, and then the staffing could potentially go away in a couple of years, as Ms. Eggleston mentioned, after we're up and running.
Should we go ahead?
Yep, okay, and so the fourth recommendation that we have is for an outreach and prevention position. And so just a little bit of the kind of background. Again, we spoke with many providers in the community and survivors as well. We know that domestic violence is cyclic in nature, and those that experience domestic violence are more likely to become victims or perpetrators. CDC research shows that experiencing intimate partner violence often begins during adolescence and is most prevalent in adolescence and young adulthood. Then that begins to kind of decline as the age group rises. And so we know the importance of early prevention efforts. So in regards to the current prevention work, during fiscal year 2017, the current, and it's through the community support services with the county, the information education coordinator provided 180 presentations to 5,046 teens throughout the county. But we know that CMS reports a total number of around 76,000 students between middle school and high school. So we know the current position is really only reaching about 6 to 7% of that age group in our community. And so that is why we were looking at a prevention position to add to that. And so we've got, I think, all the information in your report is from that that job description and what that would be. And so the ask is for $59,395 for an additional coordinator to assist in that public awareness and prevention efforts for our youth. And I think this might be something that the county is looking at since we presented it to them in their budget. And the last recommendation will be the monitoring of the implementation of the strangulation training that's being brought in June. Some of the research behind that, we know that some of the most dangerous domestic violence offenders strangle their victim, that strangulation is one of the most lethal forms of domestic violence. Unconsciousness can occur within seconds, death within minutes. Odds for homicide increases 750% for victims who have been previously strangled. But a lot of times in these, even in the fatal cases, there aren't external signs of injury. Yeah.
Just, can you clarify the training? This is going to law enforcement officers identifying? And
it's law enforcement, it's DAs, it's medical providers, it's many different entities.
911, 311 operators.
Dispatch.
Yeah. The intent is to really take a look at the systematic that a victim would go through and all the touch points along the way. So urgent care staff. So the goal from a protocol standpoint is so that our hospital systems, the police, everyone is aware, because the DA right now has a very hard time prosecuting strangulation cases because people don't take it seriously because they don't realize. So a big part of this emphasis is making sure that every touch point in our system, that awareness is there such that when it gets to the DA, it's something that they can actually prosecute the case all the way through.
And so we know that through CMPD, the city, other leaders in the community in domestic violence, we've got this really great training, kind of world class, that's coming in June. And so what our ask is here is for, and we think the city manager's office is going to be the best group to do this, to monitor the implementation of that. And so some of the feedback we had heard from providers in the community was that while not on the scale of the training that's coming now, but in the past there have been other strangulation trainings, and they've said, I attended the conference where we learned about this and thought, like, wow, this is such a great thing, and got feedback from some providers saying, we've had this before, again, not on the scale. And so really what we've seen is these types of trainings not being implemented into policies and procedures, standard operating procedures within some of these systems. So that's kind of what we want, the difference to be with the amount of money that's being put towards this training. We want to make sure that in 10 years when some of these leaders, and there's been turnover in these organizations, this information doesn't leave with them, but it's implemented into each of the systems.
It really needs to go beyond the training and become institutionalized into the various organizations, and you don't just hold the training and then that's it. That you really seize the momentum and it becomes institutionalized. So that's really the...
Yeah. And my understanding too is that the Alliance for Hope that's bringing in the training, that they also specialize in helping the systems to implement that part as well. So I think that's going to be super valuable.
Yeah, but we have definitely seen where training has come in. We have then reached out to organizations throughout the community to understand how they're implementing it and been met with blank stares or curious looks and questions and phone calls because it hasn't been implemented or the individual that we were speaking to isn't aware of the program. And so we think it's, if we're investing in the training, we should make sure that the training is effective.
Yeah. Thank you. We've got a hard stop. I have to leave at least for sure at 1. I have to speak on a panel elsewhere. But so just two things that have been on my mind, and then I'll let you all say what you wanted to, or ask what you want to ask. DV is our one policy item on our agenda right now. I'm not saying that's the way I wanted it to be, but it is. That was the one thing that was assigned to us. So I would like to see the whole ecosystem come through community safety. There was a decision made that the county, and I guess it was made between the managers, that the county and cities would sort of split it up. And so in our budget, there's $48,000 for Safe Alliance. We don't really know how that decision was made, but with regards to the e-filing and the request for magistrates, the managers decided that would be paid for by the county. None of this was part of that discussion, and I think it needs to be one discussion. And we need to have a say in some of this as to how that works. There's certainly precedent that says that the city council has paid for things that were not in its wheelhouse before. Right. One of our ADA positions in the courthouse is paid for by the city council. Mm-hmm. And that was because we, 10 years ago, understood that if the courthouse moves more efficiently, the court system moves more efficiently, that's less of a demand on our police officers. And I still think that's a good policy when we decide that we go out of our lane, if you will. So I just want to say that I would like to bring this all back into one conversation again for the committee.
I would make a motion, just because of the time sensitivity of the budget and the timing around this, that for two things. One, that we request as a committee to the manager to consider maybe up to half of the requested funds amounts that we've had, adding that in what we did yesterday, and then also working with staff and you, Madam Chair, and maybe some others on maybe sculpting out, not just is that possible to put in the budget, but where should it, because I understand your point on where it should come through, but some of it is a social service-based thing, which clearly is a county thing. Some of it is public safety, and all of it is public safety, but then we're talking about within our wheelhouse the housing element. So we could make the argument that if it's truly housing that is our angle in this, whether it's public safety on this front or public safety on near homelessness and homelessness, which also presents public safety, I think there's something they need to figure out, maybe come back with a proposal on where it makes sense for us to play, and then separately within there, but not penalize them because this is important and it's just adding into that straw budget for consideration. And then two, that we route to the new intergovernmental relations committee this to go on the first agenda, which is literally coming up on Monday, as an item to add into a new process we've been creating right now, to reach out specifically to the county and specifically to the DA on different things with their proposal and other things that we could kind of almost, and that would have to be approved through that group, so it's not an individual, it's the council's view on it. But this would be a no-brainer one to throw into there. So while in parallel we're getting what we want, we're making sure the committee's there, intergovernmental has a meaty topic to start maybe reinvigorating some things.
Okay.
I just agree with Madam Chair that we're not going to get to the Family Justice Center update, but the kind of idea behind this is that it's not spread out, that this is owned in one place. And I agree that it should be us as a council, but it should be us here in community safety. This is a community safety issue. I mean, there's a spectrum of violence that occurs, but it all kind of comes back to under our purview of City Council of ensuring our public safety. Yes, it does touch everything. Affordable housing, you can look into schools and how domestic violence manifests itself there, LGBT rights and all these different buckets, as my colleague likes to use, but it all kind of pours back into us ultimately. So I agree with you. We need to figure out how to own this.
And that's why I think it's great when you have overlaps on committees, because you're in a position to know, you know, what gets discussed in intergovernmental and here. So,
Quick question for
Kim,
clarification. Is the desire of the committee for me to take back to the city manager Mr. Bokhari's statement concerning one half of the funding request from the board? Or how would you like me to handle that in anticipation of straw votes?
How much time do we have before that has to be done?
We've got some time. We can talk about it offline.
Let's talk about it offline and give them an opportunity to talk about it in intergovernmental to see, because it might actually be if you took all of those.
We have 4 of the needed 5 votes, even though the time is over from yesterday, right around this table. So I mean, well, was the practice yesterday. Needed 5 votes to be considered.
Right. But what I'm saying is, so traditionally that's been, here's the line item number. You know, we actually put a number in there. So I would suggest that we look at the recommendations, you know, you've given them to us, and I know they were in the report. I skimmed the report. I know we got it a while ago. It's just we've been so buried
It's in
with.
your stack. Or we'll get you one.
Give me a new,
But I would say, let's look at which buckets line up for city, line up for county, and then it might be, Mr. Bokhari, that it's 2/3, 1/3, or 1/3, 2/3, whatever it is. But let's start from there saying, we need to get back to talking about this holistically.
Yeah.
And, you know, what's ours and what's yours.
Yeah.
And if there's still a case to be made for us to help out, then we can talk about that.
Yeah.
And procedurally, you can always add that even at the straw vote session.
Okay.
So that's,
okay.
that's not prohibited from a procedural standpoint.
Great.
And then that way you'll know kind of where you are with the county component, and we can work through that.
And then, and on the second front, I just request, since it's all going to happen real quickly, that you, being the head staff person for this committee, just coordinate over with Jason Kay and Dana on the other thing, and we'll get this one fast-tracked and they can start working behind the scenes.
I can do that.
Proceed with caution. Make sure the mayor know a referral is done from a committee to a committee. That normally does not happen. So just.
Cross referral.
Yeah.
Good point.
And I'm assuming you just want to add it as a topic on your agenda for
So I
Monday.
just want.
But I'm assuming that you want to add it as a topic on your agenda for Monday.
I already have in the Monday agenda,
I saw
we
the
just sent out
graphic,
a placeholder for this exact thing to be
Okay.
inserted into our
Okay.
new protocol, so.
Can I give 15 seconds on the Family Justice
Yes.
Center, because it definitely relates to this conversation, so.
If I may ask one question before our time's up, can you tell us what time that meeting is on Monday? and if we can
10:30
attend?
a.m., I believe.
And are we able to attend that?
Yes, public meeting.
Yeah, it's a public meeting, we'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Okay. So, all of.
Lauren. Can I just say real quickly, I just also want to say thank you to our committees who do this as volunteers.
Yeah.
We don't recognize you enough, and we're really grateful. CRB is sitting here too, so we are grateful for
You did
your
excellent work.
your hard work.
So for the Family Justice Center update, I'll be very brief. All of the items we just talked about in the recommendations are kind of short-term in nature. The Family Justice Center is more long-term. To your point, Mr. Winston, it brings it all under one roof. We examine business processes, and we make it much easier for the victim to navigate the process and have access to all of the service delivery providers. So the strategic study, the planning study, is about to begin. The Ron Kimball Foundation, the Jamie Kimball Foundation, of which Ron is very involved, obviously, has given money. So we have $100,000. The study won't cost that much, but they've committed to that. The study is being conducted by Safe Alliance.
Alliance for Hope.
I'm trying to go too fast.
You are.
Alliance for Hope out of San Diego. So the first town hall and gathering for community engagement is May 23rd. We can make sure it's on your calendar. They'll be in town for 2 days, meeting with various community groups and stakeholders. So we just wanted you to be aware that that process is about to begin. I am the city manager's representative on the steering committee. Dina has one for the county as well. And then you've got a list in the presentation of the other folks, the district attorney, and then folks for some nonprofits. So the process is about to begin in earnest, so we just wanted you all to be informed.
Great.
One quick, Madam Chair, I know you're about to, but then you say it's a new name, it goes by, it's a new name instead of domestic violence. What?
Intimate partner.
Intimate partner.
Intimate partner,
Yep. Okay.
And the very last item is the noise ordinance. That's just, I think you might have all been CC'd on the email I sent this morning to Bob Hageman, responding to Councilmember Newton's question. about a noise ordinance in front of
Yeah,
medical
yeah.
facilities. We're getting complaints again about Trade and Tryon, now the Eastland open air markets, noise. And so I've asked if we could look at having a review of the noise ordinance to see if it's applicable for our growing dense city.
Yeah, so given those recent complaints, we'll go do some research and we'll unpack what we might be able to do.
Okay? And that'll come through the committee.
Okay,
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
First minute.